So Jamie, welcome to the podcast, House of Visionaries, powered by Bond. So today's topic that we're gonna talk about is the future remit of TA. But before we get stuck in, I thought you could maybe share a little bit about your background.
Great, thank you. Thanks for the invite, Ben, as well. Pleasure to be here. So 20 years in TA, worked in lots of different organisations throughout my time. Probably more notably, spent some time with Meta. So I was there for 10 years, where we scaled the organisation from 5,000 people to 90,000 people. So that was quite a ride. So no biggie. More recently was with Williams Formula One. Prior to that, I've worked with Cisco and WorldPay and a few other organisations. So, but always been in TA. Enjoy leading teams. Enjoy building teams and scaling teams. And that's really my thing. So.
Yeah, awesome. You've got such a fantastic background, and we've worked together briefly in the past. And I think your background and the variety of it and some of the things that you've done is super interesting. So looking forward to diving into some of that wisdom today.
Great.
So we want to talk about the future remit of TA and the way, like, we're sort of thinking about this and where things are potentially going is trying to connect talent acquisition, talent development and talent management more under one roof. So at the moment they're working very much in silo, and the sort of space that we often see, and this is not everywhere, but kind of analogy that we use to emphasize the problem is TA hire someone, they hand them off to the hiring, they hand them off to HR, and they kind of go, that's not my problem anymore. I've done my bit, I don't care what happens from here. HR do their bit of onboarding, get some paperwork signed, they hand them off to the hiring managers. Right, that's my bit done, not my problem anymore. And then the hiring managers take them from there. And then if they don't work out, they basically just blame talent acquisition and say, well, they were rubbish, they were a shit person in the first place. So you end up with this loop of a lack of accountability, lack of understanding of what's really happening in and around the TA function. And beyond the TA function as well. And what we're potentially talking about is the future remit, or a future structure where talent acquisition, talent development and talent management sit under one connected roof, and perhaps HR operations kind of steps out a little bit more. So HR operations sort of steps to the side maybe and removes itself from this world a bit more, and HR are spending more time on contracts, employer relations, elements which talent can't get involved in, and then talent take much more ownership for the quality of hire, the development of that hire, the management of that hire, and connect it under one data set. So in terms of like that as a concept, what's your thoughts about that as a concept, and where you think maybe the future of TA is kind of going and its remit?
Yeah, no, I think it's worth taking a moment just to understand how companies get to that point. And if you take it right back to most companies they start as being founder-led. They have typically the founders doing the interviewing, the hiring. It's a small team. They know everybody personally. So they're actually doing a pretty good job of actually combining both hiring and managing their talent. And if a job needs to be done, we've got a piece of work that needs to be done, typically the founder at that point is talking about, well, this person, maybe we can give them that piece of work, and they're not always thinking about, let's go and hire somebody new to go and do that. So I think most companies start off really well and understanding that both this combination of the talent they have in their team, but also the talent they need to bring into their team as well. When organizations start to scale, we start to see that, rightly so, the founder starts to delegate responsibility for hiring to his senior team or her senior team. We start to see this evolution of hiring where the founder just becomes more and more distant, and obviously the bigger the organization gets, the further that distance becomes. So typically at this point in their evolution, there's organizations don't necessarily have, maybe they've got a recruiter on the team, they don't necessarily have a really good handle on the skills and the experiences within the organization. Maybe they don't have a system in which they can do that. So we kind of start to see these default behaviors where every time there's a need that arises in the business, the default behavior is let's go and hire somebody else. So we get very TA focused in that phase of growth. The final phase is where the company starts to mature and start to see this evolution of, well, hold on a minute, we've got people here that have been here 2, 3, 4 years potentially. We've got some great talent. We need to start managing this group of people much more effectively. And then we start to create a TM function, which is then potentially not plugged into the TA function. So, and then it's like, okay, we need more development, so we create a talent development function. So you can see over that journey how organizations, as they scale, particularly through that mid phase, how some of these practices start to establish themselves, and how companies can get very TA focused and not necessarily looking at the talent management side of things as well. So I think that's worth understanding, like how most organizations get there. And that's a pattern I've seen across multiple organizations.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting, like where you talk about there in the end space where they end up in silos, and I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit more and why that's an issue throughout this session. So if we look to break down the 3 areas of talent acquisition, talent development, talent management, if we start with talent acquisition, what do you think the future remit or what talent acquisition might look like in the future? Like if we start with that first pillar of the 3, what's your thoughts in that space?
Yeah, so I think I've seen lots of TA functions over my career that end up actually being quite heavily administrative, and spending probably a disproportionate amount of time on what I would consider to be, repeatable, maybe low value tasks, and that could be exchange of information with candidates. It could be scheduling interviews. So I think the more, and clearly we're in a period of where AI is, be remiss of us not to mention AI today. We're in a period where AI is becoming much more prevalent across all industries, and I think I think if we can really start to utilize tooling, AI-driven solutions to help take away some of that and automate some of that, there's more repeatable tasks. I think that can really start to help free up time for talent partners, TA partners, to be spending more time on what I think is probably much more value add, spending time with their business leaders, spending time sat in the department, understanding what the department goals are, what the culture's like, what the working practices are. So all those things that we can't necessarily bottle, but are really, if that TA partner is in a position to articulate that to a candidate, it can really help us to, number one, like make sure we're positioning the opportunity in the right way, but number two, make sure that we're sort of we're screening candidates in and candidates out at those early stages, because they will know what the environment's like, and the better we can articulate that, the better. So so I think automation is key. I think let's get the machines doing what the machines do. Let's get the people doing the sort of the more subtle, nuanced conversations, building relationships, all the stuff that we know that AI probably can't do. I think bringing those two things together will be really powerful, and ensure that our TA partners and our TA teams are getting very very focused on that candidate experience, and also the manager and business interactions as well.
Is there anywhere where have you seen that working anywhere in your time or close to this future remit, like the setup at Meta or areas like that, where perhaps there was more process or more resource and automation in general, which freed you up to go to the business and add more value, perhaps going as a unit, looking at things and kind of adding value into that space? Have you seen it happening in the market much yet, or do you think we're still a long way away from it?
I think it's happened in pockets. If I use the Meta example, obviously we had a very sophisticated data team who were looking at performance metrics, market insights, and I think that was developed very much through, obviously we had some dashboards and things that were developed, but the market insights was very manual, required a lot of human interaction, lots of synthesizing big data sets into insights. So I do wonder, and I haven't seen this yet, but I do wonder if that is the automation of some of those particularly market insights, performance insights of people we've hired, If we can start to consolidate those, I think that's a real opportunity to bring some of those, both the talent management and performance management elements and data, combining those with talent acquisition activities. We start to bring those together. We start to build a much more compelling vision around how do we go to market, what the skills we're looking for, what do we know works here, what do we know doesn't work here. So that can really help us to refine the TA process. But I've seen it in a very manual way rather than a much more tool-driven, automated way.
Yeah, I think that's the utopia. That's where everyone wants to get to, that one connected view and being able to lead from a talent acquisition point of view, but with data insight at a click of a button is where we want to end up. And we were speaking a little bit offline about, is there any tool set out there that actually allows you to do that? Because everyone sort of knows what they want to be able to present at a click of a button and the data they want to collect, but it's almost impossible to collect it all and to have it all in one place very easily. There's no off-the-shelf product that covers that suite. You might have to piece them together, and that's very, very difficult. But have you seen much out there that you think is getting close to be able to, if we had more time, by automating lots of processes, we could add a lot more value and consult. But to do that, we probably need some tooling and some systems that allow us to do so. Have you seen much in the market that you think is getting close to be able to do that, or do you still think we're a long way away on that as well?
I think there's definitely a recognition of this need, and I definitely see at the enterprise level there are some tools that are very AI driven, that are really looking at this whole talent cycle, from talent acquisition through to onboarding, through to talent management, and potentially through to talent development as well. So I think there are definitely a couple of products out there which are starting to think about that and starting to facilitate that, and as conceptually, and I've seen a few business cases where that's actually starting to be brought to life by organizations. But I think that's probably, as I see it at the moment, probably the reserve of the large enterprise, and not necessarily accessible maybe for those more medium enterprises where, you know, a lot of these solutions are very expensive. There's a big outlay, and probably for that medium size scaling organization where you probably really start to need that, because that's where you really embed your hiring practices. I haven't seen that. Maybe I just haven't seen it and it's happening, but I haven't seen that there's AI-driven tools being deployed at that sort of mid and scaling market.
Yeah, same. I've not seen much in by way of tech stack or tooling that helps this. And I think you're right. If you can embed the tooling early enough, you set the right processes and behaviors through the scale functions. Once you get to a very, very, very big business and you try and implement the process and the tooling, it's so much more difficult than if you embed it on the way up. But most of the companies that are looking at it, we spoke about offline, they're very much an enterprise solution. They're very much going to be targeted at large enterprise, I would imagine. So it'd be interesting to see where the market goes in terms of what technology is going to facilitate this journey, because I think there's a screaming need for it. Everybody understands the systems they would like to be able to deliver a better solution in TA, but let's see what sort of tooling makes its way out the next couple of years. And
I think there's just speaking the same language and having the same definitions and having this sort of like end-to-end view of like skills and talent. I think that, you know, just even establishing that could be a great start point. What makes a great hire versus a great performer? Like just really bringing together some of these, some of the language, and making it much more holistic in how we're thinking about it. But then clearly technology will be able to underpin that and facilitate that as well. So
moving on to talent development, what do you think? What do you think that might look like over the next few years, and what role might TA play in that world?
So I think there's I've seen some really good examples of this where organizations really start to think about creating a culture of internal mobility, internal development, and creating the right tools and environments and resources for individuals to be able to say, this is my strength, this is what I'm really good at, this is the areas I need to develop, and this is how I'm going to develop, and this is how the company's going to support me. But so having this sort of environment where, you know, we're really looking at for individuals to drive their own development, to drive their own careers. I think it's been really powerful, and you see, even when we're hiring externally, you can really see those that have really owned that, and been exposed to multiple experiences over time, quite different experiences over time as well within one company, and they've really driven their own development and their own, almost like individually driving their own talent management. They're managing themselves and they're managing their careers ultimately. So I've seen that work really well. I've also seen organizations that have been very active in managing talent, and I hired this is going back a few years now, but I hired an executive from a consumer company, and I looked through their profile and I was like, wow, you've gone from MD of this country, and then you were CFO of this country, and you've got all this like wild range of experience. Like, how do you make those transitions? And it was really interesting what he said. He every few years he'd get a tap on the shoulder and say, right, you've done your bit now. We need you to go and move and work in this country. We've got an opportunity here, and that's a real sign of maturity for that organisation, because they're really putting their smartest people on the biggest problems, and making that connection is not always something that companies do. So creating this sort of like company-led position where we want to make sure that we are really moving our talent around, and sometimes pulling some of your most talented people off the problem they're solving for at the moment to redirect them to another priority is quite a bold move. So I think where companies like have that culture and that environment where they're prepared to do that, I've seen a lot of success in how that's played out. So so I think this sort of idea of having very much a individual-led development environment, facilitated by a company-led, these are my people on the top right of my 9-box grid. We're going to need to move these people around the organisation to retain them and reduce our flight risk. So I think that push and pull effect can be quite powerful.
Yeah. When you talk about that, it reminded me of the new CEO at Pret. Have you seen his profile? He started out in the store, and he's now the CEO of Pret, and he's literally, the journey you're talking about there, they've moved him from one to one. He's moved all the way through the organisation to now be the CEO. His CV is incredible. So in terms of that talent development piece there and what you're talking about, what role do you think TA can potentially play in that? What will be the role of potentially talent acquisition to facilitate more internal mobility, better internal mobility, more visibility of it, all that type of stuff?
So the thing I've noted in a few organisations is there's almost not we create TA teams to be very externally focused, and I think that is absolutely appropriate at certain points in the journey, but sometimes to have I think equally we have to have this focus on internal talent as well. So creating an environment or a TA function that is not just like purely like externally focused and purely just looking at through the window and looking at what talent's out there. I think, and I haven't necessarily seen this play out in this way, but having a TA team that's also be able to tap into an internal talent pool as well, that is maybe active, that is opting in to be open to opportunities, that is ready for a move. And I think there's probably, I haven't seen organisations do this particularly well, but I think if we can create this environment where the TA partner is actually looking both internally and externally, I think the third leg of that stool is actually saying, okay, well, if we really trying to solve problem X, we need Y skills. Like, how do we have internal talent, but maybe there's a development aspect to this to say we need to transfer that person from this, and we need to cross-skill them for 3 months, and then we need to bring them into the business, and then we need to upskill them. We know they're smart, we know they have good learning agility, we know they have curiosity, we have high confidence that we'll be able to translate them into that. So I think the role that TA plays is not just looking at just out the window and external talent, but actually looking at internal talent and how do we bridge potentially any skills gaps or knowledge gaps, and bringing in that sort of talent development aspect of that as well. Yeah,
I think if I look back at most of the enterprise environments that I've worked in and been involved with, normally the TA function will cover both. You'll have a talent partner that is looking at a business area, looking at both outbound and inbound applications and internal applications, and they're serving one purpose within that. I think it's a really interesting concept, splitting them and having just an internal focused sourcing function effectively, and going around the business, mapping the top 25 in each function. How do we progress them, develop them, and use them? Because, like you said in a previous point earlier, they're going to be the best, the most powerful, the most trusted, the most knowledgeable in the business. How do we take them and put them into roles that are absolutely business critical to the strategy? I think there's definitely something in that methodology that's really interesting, and through that it becomes a really advanced function where they can be looking at strategic workforce planning. They can partner with all sorts of other business functions to drive this internal mobility element, and develop talent, and how that all links together. I think it's really interesting. Okay, so the third pillar, the final pillar, talent management, off into the hiring manager's world. What do you think that might look like, and again, how could TA advance and progress beyond their current point, which at the moment is kind of like, right, we've given it to the hiring manager, it's their problem now, and we'll just wait until something goes wrong and they'll blame us. How can we...
That's never happened then.
Yeah. Massive sweeping generalism and statement, but I'm sure most people out there will have felt that pain many times. Yeah. So what would that potentially look like, do you think, in terms of how could we advance into the talent management world a little bit? How can we help and influence that world? Because also, right, they're super busy. The managers have so much that they're trying to achieve in terms of writing code, building a new product, looking at finance, or whatever it might be, building the brand. They are absolutely stacked themselves. And now they've got this person they need to mentor, manage, guide, train. And we all know the hardest bit about business, full stop, is people, is managing people and dealing with people. So how could we add more value? How can we become a function that is value add rather than looks replaceable at times when markets are quiet? Like, how do we step into that space, do you think, maybe?
So one thing that's really interesting is when a new person enters the organization, we spend in many cases hours and hours with them, understanding their strengths, understanding their development areas, understanding what they're good at, what their motivations are, and so we step out of that interview process with a really rich insight in terms of what that person is about, what they want to do, where they can add massive value to the company, where we can help them with their development. What I don't necessarily see is, or maybe I see this in more, I've seen this work quite well at the executive level, where we've got individuals who come into the business because there's been a much more high-touch interview process potentially. Maybe there's been some psychometrics and some testing, so we have a really good view of how we of the strengths of that individual. What I don't necessarily see is, as that person comes into the business and their journey through the first 6, 12, 18 months, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, I'm not sure we at any other point in their career journey have the same level of insight that we do after we've spent many hours with them at interviews. So I wonder if there's an opportunity here to say, how do we, almost on an annual or biannual or a regular basis, have this ability to really understand the motivation of the individual, really understand how their skills have evolved and how they need to evolve further. What do they enjoy doing? What's their strengths and what do they really love? So I wonder if there's, and I think the reason that maybe doesn't happen, if we have a company of 1,000 people and we sat down and we spent 5 hours interviewing every single, it's purely not scalable, right? It's not realistic. So I think, again, I wonder if there's a way in which we can start to evaluate our own talent on a more of an ongoing basis, rather than and using, maybe there's self-assessments, maybe there's quizzes, maybe there's smart ways to get insights in terms of what that person's thinking, what's their motivation. So that, if we're able to somehow join that up with the TA's process and almost we're generating the same level of and richness of insights and the talent management side as well, it can really help us to understand and almost understand the skill base across the business, in the same way that we did when they entered the business day one. So again, it probably comes back to scalability, tooling, self-led, company-led, same model as talent development, but having this idea around, how do we make sure we're on an ongoing basis having this really good idea around where our talent sits, where our talent gaps are, what do we need for the future of the business, and then how do we ultimately knit all that together. The other thing I would say is I've sat through many talent reviews and over the years, and various 9-box grid is a very, very popular way of doing it. Those at the top right, I've often seen organisations go, right, these are our top talent. They come out the meeting and go, right, we'll see you in 12 months, and that person will still be in the top right in the same job. It's like, how active are we being, and how are we really using those insights to really actively manage? So I think that's a bit of a cultural thing as well, and creating the right culture of how do we get our best people on our biggest problems. That I think that's really key.
Yeah, I really like that concept of best people on biggest problems. I've got this theory around the 3-year itch, which we've spoken before. This 3-year theory that after 3 years, either they leave, they're going to leave a company and they go and do something different, or their performance dips.
Yeah.
And I wonder whether, like you say, maybe not sustainable to be doing these types of interviews every 6 months, every year, because there's just too many people to get across, takes too much time. But I wonder whether there's something you can insert around the 3 years or in the lead up to the 3 years, where you're re-interviewing them again and you're looking at their behaviours and motivators and future career aspirations, so they don't either leave after 3 years. I think the average tenure of someone in tech in London is about 2.5 years. I think it was at 1.8 when things got a bit crazy a few years ago. But so if you can catch it before that and insert this in that window, it should either stop the slight drop in performance, where they've been there 3 years now and they're sort of in the cycle, it's doing the same thing and it sort of dips off a little bit, or they think, I'm going to go somewhere else and have a look. There might be a window there where you could insert that type of process in, which I think's interesting. And I think in terms of how TA can set talent managers up and look at talent management, is what value can we add and give them. So we're testing a lot of looking at quality of hire and testing a lot of assessment tooling at the moment, and it gives you what their onboarding style is, how they like to be onboarded. It gives you how to manage them. We're building a scoring framework that shows where their skills gap is. So it'd be very easy, I think, if talent had more time and we took processes, tooling, automation, AI, and used that to create more time to be able to hand off to talent management with look, here's how they're going to like to be onboarded, here's how they like to be managed, here's their personality profile. Not only that, through the assessment process, you scored them lowest in this area, so here's a development plan for that individual over the first 90 days to close that gap. We're suggesting you buddy them with somebody in this function to do that, and we've connected them, and they're going to buddy them and shadow them and mentor them through this period. So there's a real clear value add from TA that not only is in the acquisition and the assessment of the individual, but it also starts to bleed into the management and the development of the individual, but we're controlling it. We're taking accountability for that journey and not just passing the buck down the line. And I think at some point, it makes sense for talent to extend that remit, but I think for the profession and for the sector, we have to show more value beyond the acquisition element, because as we've seen, otherwise we're deemed as a disposable resource quite often, more than not, and that's really painful for the community. Now, if we can add value way beyond that, people are going to see that value, and I think we're going to do much more interesting roles, add much more value, and hopefully have much less bumpier careers as we go through those journeys. So we've spoke about, I suppose, the concept of having these things connected, and I don't think as many people would disagree with it. It's not necessarily something completely revolutionary, because a lot of people would agree with it. I'm not seeing anybody do it. What would you say a potential, like if we had to go at building a future TA talent development, talent management framework, putting you on the spot a bit with coming out with some wisdom. But is there a framework in your mind that you would say, look, if I had the opportunity in a blank canvas to build something without the legacy challenges and I was going to build it clean, what do you think that could look like, that future org for TA, that future remit? Is there anything in your mind you think how it could maybe be structured?
Thanks for putting me on the spot there. Just solve world peace while I'm at it.
I know you've got some good ideas.
Yeah.
Jamie. I know you can pull on some stuff.
So I think there's a blank piece of paper, like, very sort of blue sky thinking, if we can call it that. I think this, when you have a talent acquisition team, by definition, almost always they are externally focused. You goal them that way, you set them up that way, that's what they do, they're rewarded for that, they're measured on that, they have performance, everything is focused on that. So say if you were to reconfigure something which is like more of a talent, not a talent acquisition partner or a talent acquisition team, but a talent team. So individuals within that team, or even holistically as a team, you have somebody who sits and really consults with the business and to understand their key problems, their key business challenges, and translate that into a talent challenge or a talent opportunity. So all of a sudden you've gone from having a tell me who you want to hire type of conversation, and you're just taking the order, we need 3 years of this and 5 years of this and this programming language and that programming language, to like what's the talent challenge you're actually trying to solve, which might lead you to some slightly different conclusions, which could be actually these skills, like we've looked, these skills don't exist internally, it's a new product, it's a new development, like we can't fulfill this internally, or we don't have the capacity to do that. Or it may say, actually, this could be an opportunity for somebody from this department with the right transition plan and the right development plan to come and fulfill your needs. So it's getting those TA teams to think or those talent teams rather, to think much more broadly around how you solve the problem. And it's not always, we give the problem, we need this many years of the solution, this many years of experience, this many years of X, Y, and Z, and we go and hire externally. So I think just broadening the thinking would be really helpful. So I'm not sure that's the revolution that you're maybe hoping for, but I hopefully that gives you, I think, just having this sort of slightly broader lens, and setting the teams up in such a way that they start to think more broadly about talent and not just looking at TA or TM or TD. It's having a broader lens.
No, I think there is some brilliant stuff in there, and to play it back and how I'm thinking of it in my head is, at the moment most TA functions are structured TA partner pointing at business function, as you mentioned there. Yep. So you've got TA partner pointing at tech, and they take the requirement for 50 new heads and they go externally and source them. So that's the current structure predominantly. And what you're talking about there, which I think is really interesting, is taking that away and having talent manager, and that talent manager can then call on maybe 3 prongs. So you've got your external sourcing function, you've got your internal sourcing function, and you've got maybe your L&D team. And that talent manager faces off to the stakeholder. Mm-hmm. They take the requirement of, we need to grow, we need 50 heads in this particular function. But they're then not, because the default is always then just over here into external sourcing, right? They now have the ability to go, right, okay, I'm going to look at what our external sourcing strategy is. I'm going to look at what our internal sourcing strategy is. And I'm going to look at how we can maybe develop some people as well. Mm-hmm. And in that, you get a really sophisticated solution going back through, whereby you could go external and cherry pick the top 5% in the market. Yeah. You could also supplement that with a bit of internal application, so people that have asked to move around internally. But also those people that have asked to move internally may have skills gaps, and they then can plug those gaps by you leveraging a bit of a development plan from your L&D partner. So you end up with this solution that's much more sophisticated and much wider. I also think there's a huge opportunity to make that a cheaper solution as well, because if you've got the talent manager sitting in that seat, they're doing the people aspect and facing off, which means your external sourcing function and your internal sourcing function could become heavily automated, especially the internal function. That internal function could become 90% automated using AI with internal movers. You're then just plugging in 10% human to look at the development aspect of, okay, how can we develop them? How can we put a training plan in for them? And the external function, again, you could decrease cost by looking at automation AI, but also you're looking at just sources. We just need sources in this function, people that, not always, but generally might be a slightly lower cost resource. You can scale and make it very efficient. So you end up potentially with actually a lower cost model as well, where you've not just got loads of expensive talent partners all facing in, all going external, potentially leveraging agencies and other expensive routes at the same time. So I think that model's like really, really interesting, and I think you might have cracked it for TA, and on our next podcast we can crack World Peace.
We'll tick that one off.
Yeah, we'll do that on the next one. But Jamie, I've absolutely loved having you come and join us. We've worked together in the past, and someone who I really respect as a person, but also really respect your TA viewpoint. Having so much experience coming from places like Meta, Williams, Cisco, you've been there and done it with some of the best and in and around some of the most interesting environments and seen a lot of stuff. So I really appreciate you taking time to come have a chat today, and I've absolutely loved it.
Great. Thank you, Ben, and best of luck.
Yeah, cheers, mate.
Cheers, mate.
Thank you.
Thanks.